gardener with a UCCE, and so if I um, lend towards some plant side versus just bee side and just pollinator side, it's because I have, like, I wear two hats, and I enjoy the looking at it from a couple different sides. It's just fun for me. Just to let you know that the South Coast Rec was established in 1956. It's about 200 peer research and about 400 total acres. And we do have about a 2 dozen hives located. And this is a combination of managed hives, and occasionally we will pick up and have a hive that we will capture and bring in sort of as a wild hive. We produce about 300 to 400 pounds of honey a year, so not too much, but it is definitely enough to practice and bring in a lot of new beekeepers, including a lot of new technology. So if you are interested in doing any kind of beekeeping and you're in the Orange County area, please contact me and I will send you off to the right people. Camp in the Shrek is known as the Shrek satellite. Okay, so again, we have three classes. This one is pollinators and plants, what I should need to know. The second one is more of my master gardener background, creating gardens and homes for pollinators. And I think Keon said that this one was his favorite because there was a lot of things that need to be known how to actually create a successful garden. And the last one was planting year-round pollinator gardens, which is using just natives. So that was a little bit more challenging, and we're lucky in that we have lived in a very Mediterranean area in Southern California, so we can pretty much grow everything. I shouldn't assume everybody's taking classes from Southern California, but just to let you know that we would be talking about how to test your soil for drainage, how to amend it, different types of methodologies so that you can plant a year-round using California natives. Okay, so just a fun fact is that, and I just introduced these just to show nice pictures, but look at the eggs of these bumblebees. Isn't that fun? And it's sitting there on its nest, and they prefer abandoned rodent burrows or sheltered areas. So this one was actually inside a wheelbarrow inside a garage or barn, and had just a little bit of hay and dead grass at the bottom. So as it turns out, a lot of the natives do like the sort of rough and tumble backyard. So if you have a tree that you're cutting down, it's okay to leave a couple branches on the ground. It's especially if you want to have some ground dwelling pollinators there. If you have a well manicured garden, it sometimes is a struggle to leave an area unmanicured because it's just aesthetically, you just want to do something with it. But a lot of the, for example, native bees do nest in the ground, but they won't dig through more than a 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch of mulch. So if you have your typical 2 to 3 inches of mulch, which is good in general for moisture control, for weed control, and as to provide an ongoing nutrient supply for the plants as it decomposes. So it all makes sense to mulch, but leave an area that's unmulched. So it leaves raw, plain dirt, especially if there's a moisture area in your garden where they can get mud. And you'll see later on, as you explore bees they use the mud to create their nests, and in natural crannies, and to form different capsules and different um, uh, uh, rooms for their young to grow in. Okay, so that's kind of fun. The numbers, so the numbers um, aren't minimal. They're pretty strongly in favor of saying that if we don't do something about pollinators, that we're going to be in trouble. Between 75 and 95% of all flowering plants need pollinators. So the rest that don't need uh, pollination are either breeding uh, um, asexually through breaking off of pieces of them, or like things like seaweed, which is more like a fern. They just pieces of it just break off. So there's just other methodologies, but between 75 and 95% is a pretty big number. They pollinate 180,000 different plant species and more than 1,200 crops. And they hold keystone species, help hold together ecosystems. So we'll talk about that more as they reproduce and create plant diversity. So the problem is that populations are changing. So don't you love this picture of it's too bad you can't see my cursor, but I'm just looking at the shape of the storm approaching. I don't know what town that is, but they're in trouble. But yeah, that's the problem is that we have this approaching problem that pollinator populations are in decline, and it's mainly a loss in feeding and nesting habitat. So the take-home message is that there's some things that we can do, and we can do things locally, and that's really the key. So a case in point is the monarch butterfly. Is that in July of 22 that the IUCN put the monarch on the red list, which is only 2 steps away from extinction. And in North America, that's us, it has declined somewhere between 22 and 72%, depending on the type of analysis. But it used to be, and I think just anecdotally, that most of you would agree that when you were younger, you saw a lot more monarch butterflies flying around. It was not uncommon to have them in your backyard and see 1 or 2 a day at least. And now when you see one, it's like, oh, look, a monarch, it's like, it's a big surprise. So that 22 to 72% decrease over the last 10 years is significant. So using the lower number in 2020 after discovering a 26% decline, even that's not as high as the 72, obviously. But they announced its inclusion in the endangered species was that it was a candidate, but other species were considered higher priority, which is, I'm not privy to the decision-making process, but it's something as iconic as the monarch. I'm sorry that there are species that are in more trouble than the monarch is. So anyway, right now, currently, that means that the monarch butterfly don't have any current legal protection under the U.S. Endangered Species Act. So what is threatened? So we look at food, plant diversity, plant and animal diversity, climate, geology, and financial implications. And we're going to go through each one of these as we, each one of these. So food. So what is threatened? Fruit, vegetables, grains, etc. are obvious. Remember that animals consume plants. So if we think about food, we can also think about meat, dairy, poultry, fish, and also insects, which are a future food source. I'm sure you have seen travel uh, in food travel where they are in a foreign country where they're sampling crickets and things like that. And just to let you know that most meat, like beef and chicken, etc., are somewhere between 15 and 35% protein, and that's dry weight. Whereas the dry weight of black soldier fly larvae is 50% food protein. So it may be that we have to look at this, and it may not be that we have crickets for dinner, but it may be that instead of cooking with um, uh, that milk proteins in our protein drinks, that we eventually use insect protein sources. So we're going to have to kind of reinvent ourselves as we go, but there are some obvious strategies that we can take in the future to replace these pollinator-based food sources if we do need to. So in that same mode, we're looking at 1 in 3 bites of food we eat are from a pollinated source. So we see, again, dairy, poultry, and there should be some fish in here somewhere. But that's as we eat, think about that pollinators are important, and 1 in 3 bites are from a pollinated source. So what is threatened? Also plant and animal diversity. And I think that the key one that I think about in terms of diversity is a source of future medical, because it affects everyone. And if someone's thinking, well, it's not critical that we have 14,000 species of nematodes out there, but you never know. It may be that somebody in some forest kicks over a rock and you end up with a cure for cancer because there's some growing under there was some fungus or some nematode that was eating the fungus, and you end up with a medication that's original biomaterial. Um, um, there's also ability for us to test medications on lower animals and plant species, and then animal transplants. That's also big in the news. Large organs, hearts, potentially lungs from pigs and certainly the cellular level and tissue level have been used for years. For example, pig skin is used have been used traditionally for burn victims, where they either get the pig cells and they grind them up and spray them over a surface, or actually use actual pig skin itself as a temporary skin, while the recipient's skin is growing from underneath. And so it creates a shell that allows growth underneath and protects it from all the contaminants in the air. And again, organs, that's the big one, where you have a huge list of organ transplants that are waiting for the right type of organ, including in tissues, the Philadelphia chromosome, for example, in leukemia is a big one. That there's it's just they know exactly what the problem is. So it may be that we use a little bit of genetic diversity, but the source of that may be based upon animals that we don't even haven't discovered yet, or haven't discovered that relationship that we can alter their genetic base that can provide cellular tissues and organ transplants. So huge ethical but practical um, dilemma, and the answer is the best thing to do is to keep up our plant and animal diversity as long as possible, because it may be that it may save the world, and it may save us as a person that has some disease that becomes reliant or capable of being ameliorated or cured by medications or animal transplants. So, fun fact that we usually think about pollinators as being small, you know, butterflies, bees, moths, but they have some plants that are so tough and so in this one type of tree in Madagascar, and it's also in Florida in other tropical areas, called the traveler's tree or traveler's palm. But it's about a 40-foot high, so certainly bugs could fly up that high, but it's so tough that they can't get into it. So so this lemur, which is I think a old world monkey, um, is goes up and tears it up with their hands and puts the long tongue inside it. And so it's unusual to think about a mammal as being a pollinator. Um, and the significance of the traveler's palm. It's called a traveler's palm because well, there's two reasons. Is one is that the palm itself has cup-like bracts and that hold water, so travelers could always go and find water so they could drink. So that's one theory. The other theory is that would be like an emergency drinking supply. But another plausible reason is that the fan tends to grow on an east-west line, so the most palms are grow sort of circular. This one grows kind of linear, so the leaves grow off to the left and to the right and not forward and back, but they line up on east-west line and provides sort of a crude compass. So if analogous, for example, to the thought that in general moss grows on the north side of trees. So if you're lost in the forest and you see moss only on one side, that probably is north. So it gives you an idea. So anyway, just some fun stuff, right? Fun facts. Climate, this is also threatened. There's everything from planet to microclimates. So I'm in Orange, California, and so we had rain the other day that comes from a um, a particular concentration of moisture heading from the south, picks up moisture coming from over the Pacific Ocean and funnels this into this atmospheric river of moisture, and we've gotten a lot of rain in Southern California. And so this type of change has led to villages in France being overwhelmed and huge deluges of water flowing down and destroying villages that have been there for hundreds of years, that never have seen that amount of water coming down at one time. So the um, the soil stabilization uh, methodologies have to change so that these areas in France and these areas in Santa Monica, California, have to change their stabilization of hills. Um, so it in some ways is economic, but it's also can be life threatening. And also it can also change the productivity of an area. Remember the Dust Bowl where they would use a lot of surface plowing, and you had about a 5 or 6 year period where they lost millions of cubic feet of good growing soil, and it just moved to another area. Uh, another example would be storm surge absorption. So you have the repeated um, storms in coming off of the East Coast and southern areas approaching Florida. And if it weren't for the seagrass, the marshes, the estuaries, and the mangroves, that the damage to the land masses would be huge. And so what stabilizes that are grasses, marshes, estuaries. These are plants, and these are something as innocuous as the sandbar out 20 miles at sea really does change the impact of a huge storm surge. And if we lost that, then the damage would be huge, especially in combination with Greenland, um, the amount of snow and ice mounting off Greenland and Antarctica. Each might change sea height level by a foot, and then you get the overall warming of the water, which is may change just the volume of the water to another foot. So you get 30 feet of seawater height change, and then you combine that with the climate changes and storm surges, and now we're talking about maybe 20% of Florida being um, underwater, and so this is the time to be really protecting our estuaries and mangrove because they become even more important. Finances, pollinators add somewhere between 253 and 577 billion, which is a big number to the global economy. Honeybees alone are responsible between 1.2 billion and 5.4 billion in agricultural productivity in the US. The and then the pollinator dependent crops are worth estimated $11.7 billion. Here's an interesting number, is that 1/3 to 1/2 of all US agricultural workers, this is all the US, about 800,000 live and work in California. So not only is this financial risk out there in the relationship between pollinators and finance, but it's concentrated in certain states where the opportunity to grow a variety of crops through the year because of its mild climate are concentrated. Um, it's a beautiful picture. These are almond trees, and I'm sure you guys have heard about almonds. Is that we do need pollinators for almonds and several other kinds of nuts, but almond is very specifically a crop that is valued high cash value crop. There's over 1.2 million acres currently under almond that support almonds exclusively. So that's a lot of land, and you need about one hive for every 200 acres. So you end up with 600,000 hives, and that creates this economy where you need to move these hives from all over the country, and it becomes its own business. Of course, that relationship between agriculture and bees needs to be managed. It wasn't 5 years ago when almond farmers were bringing in the hives, but also were spraying insecticides and other sprays uh, during the day, and we're killing off the bees. So finally, which doesn't make any sense at all. I mean, obviously, um, so the bee wranglers that brought the bees in from all the states said, if you're going to kill our bees, it doesn't matter if you pay us or not. We're not coming because we have this is our stock and trade. So they learn through education. This is where California Master Beekeeper Program and its research does come in directly, working with commercial beekeepers and working with commercial farmers to come up with something as simple as spray at night. So, did they have to change, their spraying technology and bring in helicopters at night and et cetera? And the answer is yes, but it is an example of research, of cooperation, of knowledge, education, and people coming down to a dollar decision that says if we want to continue growing, that we have to respect all components of what is necessary, including the livelihood of beekeepers and keeping our bees alive too. So solution is that not unusually and not atypically is that if we think globally, but we plant locally, okay? So pollinators need help, and we know that we can help them. Conservation techniques do work. We have inclusive opportunities for home dwellers, local, state, national governments, and private industry. So you have to understand the significance of action versus inaction. So, for example, I live in Orange, and they down the street they closed an old fire station and opened a new one. So they opened it up, and it was beautiful. But I looked at the landscaping. I said, "Oh, I should have known that they put in non-flowering plants and trees that pine trees that really don't support pollinators. They're mostly wind pollinated." And I said, it's an opportunity lost. So even myself, understanding the significance of action versus inaction, there was an opportunity there because I could have gone in and helped them and worked with uh, um, at least putting in a a word for putting in flowering plants. So anyway, think locally, think globally, plant locally. So in my front yard, I do like moths, and I do like um, uh, creating environments that are both beautiful and support um, pollinators. And this is just when I planted it, but it is now flowering. These uh, cactus and succulents do flower quite. I would say they have flowers 4 5 months out of the year, so that's pretty good. And they're in full bloom right now. So there's an example where instead of just having grass, that it did take a little bit of work to remove um, a square, a cubic yard of soil, or 2 cubic yards of soil, and replace it with flowering plants. But again, home pollinators do help. So pollination, birds and the bees. So just talk about some basic concepts of how pollination works. So they have the stamen and the pistil, and the goal those will see some pictures and remind you of things that you have seen before, but it's good to remember that there's sexual reproduction, and that the goal of every living organism, including plants, is to create offspring for the next generation. In this case, it's creating seeds. So we have pollination occurs when birds, bees, bats, butterflies, moths, beetles, and other animals, including, as it turns out, lemurs, water for waterborne plants, or the wind for most grains, for example, like wheat, corn. That's why corn, for example, is planted in rows and not in, so it's not necessarily for harvesting, because that's not necessary. It's planted in rows so that the wind can go down the rows and create pollen, because each one of those pollen kernels on corn need to have its own, has its own, and that's where the silk comes from. Is that it needs to be pollinated. Each one needs to be pollinated separately. So that to get even pollination, that's why it's planted in rows. Okay, so that's wind pollination, carries pollen from flower to flower, and is moved within flowers. So a stamen pistil on the same flower, or between flowers on the same plant, or between different plants with flowers. The only rule there is that the pollen moves between flowers of the same species, that leads to fertilization and seed development and fruit production. Okay, and other factors such as drought, extreme temperature shifts, or diseases may prevent full fruit and seed production. So other thoughts about these factors, including drought. I was mentioning to Keon that one of my current projects as a master gardener is to develop a demonstration garden for hydroponics. So we're using half-gallon containers and using the Kratzky method, which is a deep water method where you suspend plants inside a container of fertilized water, and the roots barely touch the water, and the roots will grow down and seek the water. The nice thing about it is that you don't need soil. You fill it once and you forget it. In other words, you don't have to add water to this container because it has a lid on it. And you can grow lettuce, you can grow tomatoes. It's you don't necessarily need grow lights, although that does help. But it uh, does help to have plants that you can grow on, flowering plants and fruiting plants that can grow on patios where there's no soil, or on a balcony on an apartment. So these are drought resistant. The fact that it always has its own water supply, you don't have to supply it, you don't have to renew the water, helps to produce a system that is self-sustaining. And if you use flowering plants, can certainly add in the pollinator support. So think about hydroponics as well. Pollination syndromes. These are, it's an interesting concept, is that flowering plants have co-evolved with their pollinator partners over millions of years, producing a fascinating, interesting diversity of floral strategies and pollinator adaptations. So you can imagine that we have a world full of different flowers, um, color, form, scent, and a lot of that is developed in association with the pollinators themselves. So, for example, you would see a stripe on a petal, and it's like, well, Mother Nature just decided to put this stripe down the middle. But as it turns out, the bee or the moth can see this and see in the ultraviolet rays spectrum, and it creates like a little landing area. It's like landing signals, and says, if you head straight, you will be rewarded with nectar and pollen. And in the meantime, as you seek the nectar, you are going to encounter pollen, which I need transferred within this flower or from different parts from the stamen to the pistil um, uh, on this flower, and then you carry it to another flower on the same plant or onto a flower of a same species plant, and you end up with cross-pollination. So that's the key. And as flowers that have these characteristics are more successfully pollinated, then they carry on that particular trait that uh, um, promotes pollination uh, from the different pollinators that are out there. So that flower traits associated with different pollinators is known as pollination syndromes. And we'll talk about more, and we'll give more examples of that as we go. There's a concept or terminology that you should be aware of called biotic versus abiotic pollination. So there's biotic involves any type of organism or animals is biotic, and 80% of all plant pollination is biotic. So that relationship between um, and the other one, the 20% is wind and water. And of the 20% that's abiotic, 98 is by wind, and we talked about uh, corn, and we talked about pine trees, for example, and 2% by water. So there's certain, and that's not seaweed, by the way, but it's by flowering plants that receive the sperm are actually moving in the water and can will fertilize by water. But it's interesting is that 80% of all plant pollination is biotic, that the Mother Nature has determined that instead of relying on wind, which you have to produce, I suppose, a lot more. So who hasn't parked the car underneath, gone to the mountains and come back to the car and it's covered with that yellow pollen and producing huge amounts. So it's being efficient and that you just need just a little bit. Imagine um, how much a bee can actually carry in pollen from plant to plant. Now, of course, the bee not only carries pollen from plant flower to flower or plant part to plant part, but also is designed to carry some of the pollen back because the pollen, as you may or may not know, pollen is protein. So between nectar, which is primarily sugar uh, and as a carbohydrate, then you have the um, proteins from pollen, carbohydrates from nectar, and you have um, the plant as the one of the other beneficiary is the pollination. So it all works out good, but 80% of them are biotic. So that relationship is efficient is specific. Now, now we kind of wish that it weren't so specific, because now you have, again, 1.2 million acres of almond trees that you need 600,000 beehives to fertilize in about a 2-week period, that the flowers are receptive. And uh, it seems like it would be easier to set up a big wind machine and disperse pollen through a wind machine or from a helicopter with that. But as it turns out, that's not how 80% of the plants are set up. It's not set up through abiotic, it's set up through biotic methodologies. Okay. So water pollinated examples. So we don't see, not too many of these are edible, so we're not really used to that. So that, again, that 2% is sort of not well known or recognized. Wind pollinated grasses, trees, pollen of uh, wind pollinated plants is typically lightweight, smooth, and small, so that it can fly a long distance. And again, is produced in huge quantities. So there's a picture of a grass and of a seed head and setting out its pollen, and you can just see it looks like dust. So if you have an allergy and you're looking at this and say, well, there you go, there's the source. If you were close and you imagine a billion of these things in a field and you're driving through in your car, even, unless you have a HEPA filter, you would be immediately surrounded by and breathing these in. And if you're sensitive to or allergic to these pollen molecules or cells, then you can see how fine and how well this will travel in the wind. Okay, some fun facts here. 12% are wind pollinated, billions of pollen grains, wheat, rice, corn, rye, barley, oats, and some trees, walnuts, pecans, pistachios are usually wind pollinated as well. Okay, so basic tools and that a flower has available to it: stamen, pistil, and its different parts. And if you look down at the bottom, peduncle, at the base of the ovary, between the ovary and the peduncle, is where the nectar is stored in a nectary. And so as the different pollinators are seeking to get to the nectar in the nectary, then they run into the stigma, run into the anther that has a pollen and bumps it over and it spreads it over to the stigma, and the stigma then drops down and then into the ovary where fertilization occurs. So that, again, Mother Nature as most basic. Self-pollinating, so you hear about that, self-pollinating, cross-pollinating. So self-pollinating is A within the same flower, all right, self-pollinating, or B within the same plant. And cross-pollinating is C, where it goes from one plant to another plant of the same species. If you can get this to play.
Do we need the audio? Because we don't hear.
Okay, hold on a second. So you're not getting the video audio on that?
We're not getting the audio. You may have to reshare screen and select share my audio too at the bottom right. If you want to give that a try.
Yeah, let's do that. So let's do stop share.
Yeah.
Bees are buzzing from flower to flower. Today, we are going to talk about pollination. Who are the pollinators? Birds, bats, butterflies, moths, flies, beetles, wasps, small animals, and most importantly, bees are pollinators. They visit flowers to drink nectar or feed off pollen, and transport pollen grains as they move from spot to spot. Nectar is a mixture of water and sugar that plants produce to attract pollinators. All flowers have a male part called the anther and a female part called the stigma. Pollen is a powdery substance that comes from the male anther. When pollinators move from one flower to another, the pollen attaches to their bodies and goes to other flowers. This makes it possible for plants to make seeds and reproduce. Pollination is necessary for food production. All of our plant-based foods, including grains, fruit, and veggies, need pollination. All of our animal-based foods, like meat, eggs, and milk, also need it, because these animals eat plants too. It is so important that plants have evolved over time to have bright, colorful flowers or delicious scents just to attract pollinators. If we didn't have flowers, we wouldn't have food at all. Talk about flower power. Some of the most common pollinators are bees, butterflies, and hummingbirds. If you can keep an eye out for all the pollinators you see. If you plant flowers, this will also help feed the bees, birds, and butterflies. Keep an eye out for your favorite flowers and enjoy this lovely spring.
You want to take a break now, or
Yeah, let's take a break.
basically time?
Perfect time.
It's 10 a.m. Yeah. So break first and then questions after. Sound good?
Sure.
Okay. So we'll be back at 10:10. Think of any questions you have, and we'll be back. Thank you.
So how do we get back onto share here?
Let me resume the recording. And we do have some more questions in the chat, which is great. I'll start with the first one in order that they came in. So this question was from Pedro. Thank you for the question. Do you have any resources to learn about pesticide impact on plants and pollinators?
Well, I would refer them to camp first of all, and yes, refer them to camp and put that in as a question. The what would you recommend as well?
Yeah, I put one actually in the chat, which is and this one's very specific, but it's usually one that people don't find, so it may be useful. And it's the UC IPM pesticide lookup
Yes.
tool, and it's specific for honeybees. So it shows it actually has it for honeybees and bees in general as well, and it shows the toxicity for both. And there's like many pesticides you can search up. So that is useful if you want to look at the specific pesticide. If you're looking more generally, I think we have some resources in the knowledge base. I will continue looking and I'll include that in the recap, some additional links. And I think if I remember correctly, there's also some resources at the end, Art. I'm not sure if any of those include pesticide information, but I know there's a lot of links coming up in this presentation, I believe, too.
And
Like
certainly
therapy.
yeah, and also the different groups could help you with that too. The different pollinator associations could also give you links to pesticides and planting practices.
So next question, are these pollination syndromes species specific, or can they be more generalist between certain groups?
They're both. So for example, a water lily is has a large flower and a large landing area, so it is for any type of insect, but it is beneficial because you can see it from a distance on the water because it stands up, the flower does, and it's large. And then the water lily itself is flat so they can land on it. The problem is that the water lily then gets its pollinator and drowns it. So it takes on its pollen, drowns it, and metabolizes the pollinator. Is that like like a Venus flytrap would do? So that's general. And then some, and we'll speak to that, some are so specific that there is a symbiotic mutualism that the plant is specifically needs a particular type, a particular species to pollinate it, and also the pollinator, that's the only plant that it either eats or reproduces it. So it does go from general to very specific for the plant, only receives certain types of pollinators, and also goes the other way too, that sometimes the pollinator is dependent upon a certain plant for its reproduction.
Thank you. And Cheryl asked, I've seen bees, wasps, and other insects on my corn. Can plants that are wind pollinated also be pollinated biotically?
Typically, there may be a way of circumventing the pollination. So, for example, and we'll show a picture of this later, but the pistil is at the end of a long tube, and at the bottom of this tube is the nectar. So normally you would have if you have this tube, you have a particular pollinator that has a long tongue or small enough that can crawl down. But there are ways of circumventing that. For example, if the nectar is at the bottom of this big tube, then carpenter bees will go and just gnaw at the bottom instead of going through the tube. It'll just gnaw at the bottom and get to the nectar through force. So and so if you are seeing wind pollinated plants like corn being visited by pollinators, they probably are circumventing, they probably are eating parts of the plant. And that's probably what they're doing is nipping at the base of the pistil to get into the nectary to get the nectar, but they're not in that respect aren't pollinating, they're just robbing.
Okay, interesting. So the plants that rely on wind pollination generally rely solely on wind pollination and not pollinators?
Yes.
That's more of my question. Okay.
Yes.
Interesting.
And the insects that are there are not contributing to the pollination, they're probably just robbing.
I recently heard that honey made from privet flowers is not healthy for bees. Have you heard of this? I might prune it before the flowers bloom.
From privets?
Yeah.
So privets is hawthorn, uh, hawthorn, unhealthy. Those are those pink flowers that you see that are very common. I haven't heard that. Have you?
I haven't heard that. I haven't heard that for privets.
So there's the one that's common out here are privets, Texas privets.
I know Buckeye
Well-
trees. Buckeye trees have something in them in the pollen and the nectar that messes with the nervous system of bees. We talked about that in last class, I think. So that one you don't want, but
Well,
I don't know about privets.
there are some plants that have nectar that have hallucinogenic properties to them. So and I'll show you one of them, but or narcotic capacities to them. Some have, and they might want to look this up. It could have caffeine in it. So caffeine, which is there's about 100 different plants that produce caffeine, and I don't know if privets is one of them, but the studies have shown that plants that have caffeine in the nectar spend more time in the flower, and they also are return to that plant more often because I think the theory is that they like they like it and are attracted to it. So that all nectar is not the same. So it could be laced with narcotic-like substances or caffeine, which is a stimulant.
Yeah, at the lab, actually, at the El Nino Bee Lab, which is the parent organization for the California Master Beekeeper Program, they have done research in the last couple of years on caffeine and other polyphenols to explore their effects on bees and if they should be put in pollen patties and stuff like that. It sounds like, oh, you shouldn't give, it's unnatural to give bees caffeine, but caffeine is found naturally. That's
Yeah, 100 different plants produce caffeine. Now we know about the coffee plant, but I think citrus has caffeine in it as well.
Yeah, so on the privet specifically, I'll check internally too, and I'll include in the recap some more info if we find anything. So thank you for that question. And next question, no more questions. Any verbal questions from anyone? Feel free to just unmute and ask. Or clarifications. Okay, great. I think we're ready to continue, Art.
Okay, so let's talk about seeds now. So I love this picture. It's through the Alliance for Biodiversity and CIAT. But I love the diversity of seeds in terms of the shape, size, texture. So a lot of these are edible and are good protein sources. And all these seeds contain the genetic information to produce a new plant. And this is again just a small sampling developed in a library in Colombia. And seed libraries are a huge business now, because again we're not sure what plant may produce the chemicals that are necessary for disease or a future disease. That is the answer is in the food library, a seed library, and we could grow plants that produce the substances that ameliorate or cure current or future diseases. So everybody's active in this, and if you have Colombia and you have the jungles, it's not easy to do. And you can see again the diversity. Ken, can you see my cursor now?
Yes.
Okay, so you can see the different sides. These look like pastries here, and this look like fluff. So these would probably be eaten or fallen, and these would probably be blown in the wind. And the rest of these are somewhere in between. So we can see that the diversity is really the key. And then I'm going to try this. And let's try that. And let's try that. And I'm sharing my screen, but I'm having difficulty advancing the screen. Okay, so here's the smallest and the largest. So obviously the coconut is the largest seed, and the smallest apparently that I can find is the orchid. And the orchid, by the way, the seed is so small that it has trouble receiving nutrients from the soil. So it relies on different types of fungi that might reach out and create little tubules and provide and share nutrients through a tubular system. And anyway, you just kind of wonder how something that small survives, and the answer is it survives from another plant or another type of species of fungus to help transport nutrients and fluids to the seed as it sits inside large chunks of soil. It would not be able to absorb or have access because it's so small. So the species, its population is capable of interbreeding freely with one another, but because of geographic, reproductive, or other barriers, do not interbreed with members of other species, which is you can change the genetics through a variety of methodologies, but in general, what we're talking about in this particular discussion, it has to do with basic same species seed production and reproduction. Well, there you go. Seeds of life, seeds and life. So the ecosystem is really important, and the farmers and the ecosystem is in the center where plant breeding. And if you ever have a chance to go to I think every state probably has some, but California has many, especially in the Santa Barbara area, a lot of plant breeding and companies, and you can go to the new trials and see the new plants that would be coming out in 2 or 3 years at Rogers Gardens or Home Depot. But as a master gardener, another good reason to become a master gardener of Orange County is that you are invited to these breeder trials, and you can, get on a bus that sometimes they provide, and you go and you see what they are doing, and they have information from geneticists and look at the genetic diversity. So they're looking at different fruit production. So it's the first time that I saw, for example, a dwarf tomato plant that grows 8 to 10 ounce fruit. So it's kind of fun to have this tomato plant that has flowers and does attract pollinators, but it could sit on your countertop because it's only about 18 inches tall. So a small tomato plant, but produces 8 to 10 ounce fruit, which is a normal tomato. So plant breeding, trials, seed production supplies. So the seed production supply also includes, we saw that in Columbia, seed saving, seed libraries. It's also just make sure that as you are buying seeds that you realize that a lot of these seeds are only good for a year. Some do last for a long, long time, but that's in general under very can't, if they last long, that's under perfect conditions. So in general, if you have seeds, you should use them quickly. At one of the libraries that in Orange, they have a seed library. So you can go and you don't have to return them. You just look through this big catalog, and it just bags of seeds and just pull out whatever you want. So you can share and only take what you need, which is nice because you don't, again, it's better to use all your seeds in a year and get fresh seeds every year. And then along with this seed reproduction, they're still working with the geneticists for restoration and germplasm, and coming up with new methodologies of creating seeds and more seeds. Some are the breeding programs aren't really desirable flowers, but maybe grow great stems, for example, so that when we have grafting of plants, that the rootstock is really excellent for disease resistance, but is topped with a fruit, and of course that flowers and requires pollinators, and produces a desirable fruit in qualities that the rootstock in itself would not produce. So these are kind of morphed into different total. So for example, citrus trees and avocado trees are typically grafted, and all of this is part of this farmer agro ecosystem that we can play a part of, either observing and giving information, seed sharing and seed saving, or actually growing in our backyard. Oop, there you go. Oh, okay. So the fun fact, hummingbird color. So the gorget, or the throat color, is not caused by feather pigmentation. You would think, oh, those are just purple feathers, but actually they are an iridescence that's in the arrangement of the bubble-filled feather. So depending upon the light level, moisture, angle of viewing, wear and tear, and other factors all influence how bright and colorful the throat may appear. So again, this is used for attracting mates and showing vitality. So if he were in perfect shape, which this guy is, it attracts females and is just a beautiful display of Mother Nature's enhancements for essentially reproduction. Okay, there you go. Male Costa's hummingbird. So if you ever have a chance to go to Costa Rica, I think, has 50% of the species of hummingbirds in the world. I think it has 50% of them are represented in Costa Rica. So you go down there and you can go all day long and never see the same kind of hummingbird because there's just so many kinds. Some are pretty big as sparrows, and I think they have some little ones that are as big as large bumblebees, like an inch long. So they're quite a bit of variety down there. Oops. See, so sometimes it just does not want to move. Okay, have you guys ever heard of buzz pollination? So there are certain types of fruits, including tomato, eggplant, kiwi, and blueberry, that require a certain type of pollination, and it's mainly because the anther is so tight that it does not release the pollen and requires a little bit of vibration. So the vibration is about, the number I heard is about 400 hertz, which is suspiciously like a electronic toothbrush. So a theory is that if you wanted to have more pollination of your tomato plants, you could just hit it with a toothbrush every once in a while, or relying upon the bee species, which about half of all bee species can buzz pollinate. The ones that are noticeable are bumblebees and carpenter bees, but not Apis mellifera or not honeybees. Don't do buzz pollination, but but apparently bee pollinated tomatoes have higher levels of vitamin C and way more. So you have buzz pollination, we have the anther that is very tight, and this pollen is trying to get into here, but this anther is so constricted that it requires a little bit of vibration to open it up and allow the pollen to be released and land on the stigma, and then hence into ovary and for stimulation, but for pollination. So there you go, 400 hertz releases the pollen. Some of the now dislodged pollen goes home with the bumblebee as food. And what kind of food is it? It's pollen is protein, P for protein. And some of the pollen is transferred into stigma and hence in the ovary where it develops into new fruit. Okay. And here we go again. Let's see how this goes. Hopefully you can hear it.
Back in West Virginia, the diverse vegetation of the uncultivated areas between farmlands is home to the best known relative of the honeybee, the bumblebee. Some bumblebee populations are in decline, a tragedy since they are among the few bees capable of buzz pollination. This technique is the only efficient way to pollinate plants like tomatoes, eggplants, and blueberries. The bumblebee grabs the flower by the anthers, decouples its flight muscles from the wings, and uses them to shake the flower violently. The only way to get the blossom to dislodge its pollen. Which the bumblebees bring back to their colony.
Maybe click all the way to the right where it says copyright endo.
That one there?
No, a little bit further to the right, that strip of gray.
Back in West Virginia,
Oops.
Even for,
There you go.
yeah, there we go.
Thank you. Okay, so yeah, that is an amazing. I didn't know about that until I started doing research on different types of pollination. But you just see that once you have that subjected to that 400 hertz, the pollen just extruded in a stream. It's like that is exactly what it needs to do. So going to the question about the different types of adaptations that plants have gone through, that is an example where it's not absolutely necessary, but it is creates more fruit and higher vitamin C and more quantity if you have a particular pollinator, in this case, buzz pollinators that can pollinate the plant. So the plant is not dependent, but certainly able to produce more and healthier, apparently healthier fruit if it is buzz pollinated. Okay, so other things to think about is that as we are in I'm in a city, and we are not surrounded by farms, and as it turns out, we have to really think about constructing habitats so that our growing methodologies are healthier. And it may be that some of the old thoughts of how to grow plants more naturally have reinforced and are being currently reinforced based upon productivity, health, vitamin and nutrition, disease resistance, and of course, the commercial farmers want to produce more crop yields, but there are other benefits as well. So we have farms that are closer to natural habitats attract more pollinators because the natural habitat isn't plowed, there's undisturbed areas like we spoke about earlier. Undisturbed, uncovered soil produces many more opportunities for breeding habitat, so hollow tubes, earth, soil, so they can go down tunnels, soil and mud, so that they can create chambers for breeding. all of those attract more pollinators if there is a natural habitat that's close to the farm. So another thing that we can do is plant flowers directly into the community gardens, brings in pollinators. So you would see, for example, flowers at the ends of roses, at the ends of the grapevines in grape growing communities, and they still do that. And I think it's more tradition now than before. They would use that as an indication of different types of root diseases that the both grape and the rose were sensitive to, but the rose was more sensitive to. So it was like a canary in the coal mine, sensing the carbon dioxide levels. But here we have a different reason, is to attract pollinators and to keep them healthy and happy. In the meantime, they do visit, and we do in our gardens. This is not the one that I monitor, but the Orange Homegrown Education Farm in Orange has a similar looking farm where we have raised beds as part of the growing mediums. This looks like bok choy here. So we will let some of it bolt just for education purposes and to promote the ongoing pollinator support. Also adding habitat to farms. So a lot of this, historically, this was area between grapevines was plowed. In fact, when I went on a trip into Europe in the early 90s, they were still plowing in Europe, still plowing the area in between the grapevines in the 90s. So that's and it was, I think, one of the UC Davis's experiments on leaving this open and letting the weeds grow, and then once in a while mowing it so it doesn't become, ridiculous, but certainly, and they trim underneath the trees for cleanliness. But this diversity has resulted in overall yield. And then you're thinking, well, maybe if they plowed it, they were damaging the grape roots as well. And of course, that's part of it, but also erosion control. As these grasses grow, there's certainly some flowering components to it that promote more pollinator habitat, and with less plowing, they can get more ground-based breeding of pollinators instead of having it plowed out every year and destroying the habitat. So all in all, adding habitat to farms has led to overall yield and just as it turns out, an evolution of research and application of research into the commercial environment, and everybody wins. So how can you help? So the Abigail Derby Lewis in Chicago says that the collective impact of many of these small actions of putting in milkweed and native flowers and creating this pollinator habitat across these different and metropolitan landscapes like churchyards, schoolyards, parks, parkways, and boulevards, all of those things really add up for monarchs and other pollinators. So if you are in some volunteer or leadership role of a community garden, if you have a front yard or a backyard, commercial properties, cemeteries, civic buildings and grounds. So hence remember my reference to the fire station that went up, and there was a missed opportunity because they put out a lot of planting. So I'm sure they're not going to tear it out and put it in now, but it was an opportunity lost. And so if there are public hearings on different types of buildings, et cetera, you can go and just raise your hand and say, is there a way that your landscape architect can include pollinator-friendly plants in the landscape? And the answer probably would be, well, we can look into that, and now it becomes it's very topical, and it certainly is not it's easy to move to column B of flowering plants and have him select from, or him or her select from a different list that includes pollinator friendly plants. So it all adds up, especially for endangered species, even though not officially endangered like the monarchs. I'm sorry, it's a little out of focus here, but I love the shapes of the planters. And homeowners, sure, we can help. So, and given the fact that we have Home Depots, and we have that only, and I would encourage, not that I'm anti-Home Depot, but I would encourage that you visit smaller family-run nurseries, and because we want diversity, especially for our generalist pollinators, so it leads to healthier, and this is just speaking anecdotally, but healthier and happier pollinators, because they have differences in the quality of the pollen and the nectar. So more diversity, the better. And by the way, bees appreciate the diversity of pollen. So if you open up a hive and pull out see the pollen, all pollen is not mixed. So when a group of bees goes to the citrus area and pulls the pollen off of there, they will take that back and say it's yellow, and they will put it in a certain set of cells that are all citrus, all yellow. And then the next one that goes to another type of flower that has orange pollen, well, they'll store that in together all separately from the citrus, and now you have this area that has yellow or orange pollen. So you'll see these different, and they treat it like a storeroom. So whether it's for food, where they're going to get bee bread, where they mix a little bit of nectar along with a little bit of pollen, the bee as a hive, as a collective, decides, and the workers decide, and it sounds sort of like the Borg, the collective, but there is a inherent intelligence in the hive, so that the nutrients and the protein supplies and also the different nectars create bee bread, and that's fed to the workers and fed to the larvae as well. But they are separated out and not combined into just this mass and pile of pollen, but are kept separate. So they pick it out depending upon what the hive needs. So in terms of its nutrient and mineral needs. So the best thing to do is do plant diversity. I'm thinking maybe at least a 3-foot square of plants would be good enough to create a little bit of diversity. So instead of buying one plant uh, that you get, say, 6 and do a mass planting, which is a aesthetic decision, but it's also not an incorrect decision to mass plant. But instead of having a whole yard full of just lavender like this, you could have different kinds of lavender or different colors, different plants. But about a 3-foot square, apparently for a hive, is enough diversity of pollen and nectar. So anyway, that's just a thought as you're designing your flowers for pollinators. And we have yet another movie here.
Pollinators essentially act as a keystone species, so they have a really huge role in the environment, and a lot of other components of the ecosystem depend on them. Pollinators are experiencing many threats right now, and one of the major ones is habitat loss. Of course, we're all experiencing climate change right now. Climate change can produce conditions that make pollinator populations more vulnerable to parasites and diseases. Over 75% of the world's flowering plants depend on pollinators. Without pollinators, those plants would not be able to reproduce. We would not have access to many of the fruits and vegetables and nuts that we like to eat. They play just an incredibly key role in maintaining biodiversity and also maintaining our food security. So what are some ways that you can help pollinators? A great way is to plant a pollinator garden. Pollinator gardens are essentially places that provide habitat for pollinators to feed, to nest, to take shelter, and even to hibernate. Another great opportunity is to participate in citizen science efforts where you can contribute data that will help establish how pollinators are doing out in the wild. And one of the most popular smartphone apps for this is iNaturalist. Pollinators.
Okay, so citizen scientists and iNaturalist, there is a reference and a link lower down in my links, and it is a very structured, very intelligent, well-designed system. And for example, I was part of a study run by a scientist in South Coast Rec on the polyphagus tree borer, and so we had to go out and take pictures of sycamore trees that had been infected, and based upon the camera, the smart camera, it would log in location so that they could see where I was and take a picture of it, and then that was reviewed. And so anyway, there's not only a fun thing to do as a hobbyist to participate in iNaturalist, but also scientists are now using that as a method of getting many observers out there to check, and for example, check for certain species or health of species, or in this case, looking for presence of disease-carrying insects. And so, for example, I live in Orange, and there's a pretty large park near me, and no one had monitored it, and it had a lot of this particular polyphagus shot hole borers, and I felt very privileged to have participated in a well-structured study that based upon my information and validated by the iNaturalist and the study this and the study the principle able to help. So certainly, if you want to take pictures of monarch butterflies in the nesting habitats, there is a link to just doing that, and you can keep track of it, and it does help to know where this monarch butterflies, for example, are and where they aren't, depending upon the time of the year. And we'll talk about that in a second, because if they don't migrate, then that's an issue because they are a migrating species. So anyway, we have this nice skink here. And yes, there are lizards known as skinks, and I think they're a little bit different, but I'm not quite sure. But I think they're looks like a gecko. But anyway, this skink is found in Brazil, drinks the nectar found in the flowers of I won't even pronounce this name here, or I won't pronounce this here, but a certain type of tree, and again becomes a pollinator. So who knew that lizards, geckos, and skinks can be pollinators? And we have some questions in a minute. You want to take a break here? Let's go. Okay, so generalist versus specialist pollinators, what is the difference? So I, as a nascent beekeeper, was surprised to know the main difference between a difference between pollinators is that there are generalists and specialists, and some of the specialists are so specialized that it doesn't seem like it's very sustainable. But that's how Mother Nature has planned this, and this is how it is set up to be. So examples of generalist pollinators: honeybees, flies, and beetles. And beetles doesn't sound like it would be a big category, but they are a huge pollinator source. So because there's so many of them, that they aren't as sexy as a monarch butterfly or a honeybee, because they crawl up, well, some fly. But there's so many beetles and types of beetles that they may be in the 30 to 40% of pollinators are beetles alone. So specialists, they have the right anatomy or physiology to access the nectar or pollen. So, for example, a particularly long proboscis to reach into particularly deep flower to access nectar. And specialist bees are specific about what species they collect pollen from, but not necessarily the nectar they drink. So the pollen, again, is protein, and if you've ever seen a picture of a piece of pollen, it's a very complex molecule, and it is, again, used like an apothecary in the beehive. The nectar, I think it's one of those things, the more we know, the more interesting it gets. So one of the questions again was about is the privet not nectar not good for bees? And the answer is I don't know specifically about the privet, but I do know that there is certain plant species that have narcotics that are in the nectar that create a situation where the pollinator spends longer in there because of the narcotic, and therefore spends more time collecting pollen, and at that point also spreading the pollen from the anther to the pistil and pollinating that plant. And also you see Davis has also done some research on caffeine and bees, and indicated that, and I'm not sure if that's where the research came from, but they are attracted to and spend more time around plants that have caffeine in them because they like it. So the question is, would you, on things like commercially available pollen patties, put in some caffeine artificially, so that they would be attracted to it and eat it, and be more healthy during the winter months when you're feeding your honeybees, because you do during the winter, since there's no, or not as many. I mean, you can plant year-round pollinator gardens, but in general, there's much less forage for pollen and nectar in the winter. So you do feed them honeybees, you feed them sugar water, and if you wanted them to drink more, would you add caffeine to it? And the answer is I don't know. It sounds invasive, but right now we're at the research phase, and interesting to know that different pollens are selectively pulled by specialist bees, and some are avoided, and plants do put out certain nectars with certain components that are specifically attractive to the bee. So it, like I said, the more you know, the more complex it becomes, the more interesting it is. Plants can be specialists, so some plants can only be pollinated by species of pollinators that have specific characteristics. So we talked about these potatoes, tomatoes, eggplants. So they need they don't need, but they can use buzz pollination, because the pollen is sequestered or held tightly inside the anther. And I don't know exactly where, these are probably anthers here, so somewhere this is tightly bound. But the tomato, the one with the little slits in it, that was an obvious example where the buzz pollination, and then when that honeybee grabbed onto it and shook it, buzzed it, you can just see that extruding pollen. It was quite dramatic. So again, they can be specialists on the plant side. And here's that term I was looking for, is obligate mutualism, where some plants and pollinators take this to the extreme of an obligate mutualism, in that relationship wherein neither pollinator or plant can survive without the other. Okay, so example, the yucca plant and yucca moth. So if you look down at this picture on the left, you can see a flower, and probably the pistils here, but here's the moth here hiding very nicely in there. And here's the larvae, and larvae is inside the seed pod and does eat the seeds, but doesn't eat all of them, eats only some of them. But this is the only food source for the yucca moth caterpillars. That's the only thing they eat. So the plant can only be pollinated by the moth, and the moth can only eat the seed. And without either one of them, without that relationship, you wouldn't have either the yucca plant or the yucca moth. So it's a little extreme, but so far it seems to be working out for them. So there you go.
Is this a good place for a break?
Yeah, it's good time for a break.
Okay, so do you feel like we're kind of 2/3 way through the slideshow? I guess, are we going too fast or too slow? Should we take a longer break or shorter break?
Um,
Shorter break, we're only halfway.
about halfway.
Okay,
So I think if we go with like a 7 minute or something like that would be good.
okay, cool. So 7 minutes,
Actually, 10's fine. I can speed up a little bit.
we have a 10-minute break and then we'll be back. If anybody has some questions, please feel free to add it to the chat. We'll address it when we come back. Resume the recording. And then first questions from Kathy. Speaking of attracting pollinators, if I have a community garden that is about 20 feet by 20 or 10 feet by 20 feet, and I was thinking about not planting veggies this year, but instead doing pollinator plants, what would you suggest to plant?
I have a real wonderful selection at the end of this presentation. 10 plants that would be very, very good. So just hang on. I'll give you it'll be in this presentation.
And next question is, can you name a few examples of specialist bees? Or yeah, anything that comes to mind?
Yeah, the mason bee, for example, will is a specialist. I'm sorry, the carpenter bee. Carpenter bee is a specialist bee in that it has a pretty good jaws, and it and we talked about this before. And I'll show a picture in a second here of the pistil going down, and it going down into the neck, something called a nectary, which holds the nectar, and it actually goes down and it bypasses the whole pistil and will start gnawing at just above the nectary. So most bees don't have the jaws to do that, but the carpenter bee does, and it will sit there and gnaw at it and then drink directly from the nectary. So it does rob, but it does make up for it in that it is very woolly and looks like a little teddy bear. So I'll show a picture of that at some point. And so even though it does tend to rob more than go down the pistil with the proboscis or something, it's the fact that it's so woolly, it makes it a good good pollinator. So
Is
that's
that that's so you would say carpenter bee, specialist bee, or I've heard before it's more of a generalist, but maybe I was mistaken.
well, I was thinking about the specialist in terms of how it feeds.
Oh, okay. I think maybe I was just interpreting the question. It was like, you remember you were talking about generalist versus specialist, and like a specialist bee would be one that only has a relationship with one flower, but it could be both.
It could be both.
Yeah.
What can you let's see, let me think of another example of
Yeah.
a specialist bee. There's moths that are specialists, but bees, yes, there I think of the relationship of the of flowers, that the proboscis of a honeybee is too large to get into certain kinds of plants. And I'll talk about that. I'll talk about that later. But there are very few things that very few plants that need that honeybees can't get into. In other words, there are very few plants that are reserved for native bees. Does that
Yeah, that makes sense.
put it into context?
Mhm.
And the only really specialist bee in that respect would be some very small bees with long proboscises, small proboscises that fit into certain very small flowers, like the I think it's called a snowflower, but I'll cover that in the rest of the lecture as well. That's a good question. It's unfortunate. You would hope that there would be a whole class of plants that only native bees could have access to and not honeybees. But it's just not true. In other words, if you plant a yard full of normal flowers, it's as open to the generalists as, and there really are no specialists. So you probably get half native bees, half, if you're lucky, half native bees, half honeybees.
Okay.
All right, moving on.
So yeah, let's move on.
Oh,
Thank you.
okay. See how we do that. Let's see. Did we do this one already?
No.
Oh yeah, this is a fun fact. Okay, do bees do caffeine? Researchers have shown that feeding bumblebees caffeine helps them better remember the smell of a specific flower with nectar inside. And if any of these are what was done at UC Davis, let me know. While previous studies have shown that bees like caffeine and will more frequently visit caffeinated flowers to get to it, this study shows that consuming caffeine in their nest actually helps bees find certain flowers outside of the nest. It helps them to locate it. So we know about coffee, but I didn't know about citrus. But I think those are the ones used in the study, but are among 100 species that produce caffeine. And I didn't know that many species produce caffeine. And there's a source 18, so we can take a look at that later. Okay, pollinator syndromes. Again, these are co-evolved characteristics that more likely to interact. They benefit from a particular pollinator's flower, ensuring its pollen will be carried to another flower of the same species and hopefully results in successful reproduction. So we know about vectors. So all of these vary by the type of pollinator that visits them, and these are called pollination syndromes we've been talking about. I just want to show a picture again of the, we saw this again, but here's that filament that goes from the pollen is located here, but this is where normally they would, a pollinator would try to reach down here and get into the nectary, but you can see how long of so maybe a hummingbird would be able to do it on this particular plant, is reach down all the way down. And then we were talking about the carpenter bee that has just a short proboscis, will just gnaw right there and cut it off right there and drink directly from the nectary. In other words, rob. But since it's so big and so fuzzy, it has a lot of hairs on it that it would pick up and becomes a good pollinator based upon those characteristics of good teeth and good hair. Okay. I love these pollinator traits, and this is something that deserves being printed out and looked at. So if you want to attract bats, for example, versus birds, so dull versus bright, nectar guides, that's only with bees because they can only see in they can see in the UV. So strong, musty odors at night. So flowers are very strong. Uh, Whereas it really doesn't matter to birds because most birds can't smell at all. Nectar, bats, you need to put some, usually larger flowers with large amounts of nectar. Same thing for birds. If they're going to do it like hummingbirds, deeply hidden. Bats have long tongues, as it turns out. Birds like hummingbirds can have very long tongues along with a long beak. Pollen, bats, I don't think they eat the pollen. I'm not sure. I have to look into that. But they would be closed in the day, like the saguaro cactus, for example, closes during the day and opens at night, particularly so that the bats is available for bats. One thing about bats too is that you wouldn't want to put night lights on because they just scares them off. So there's a certain avoidance that's done from ambient night light. So again, bees, pretty typical. They like a landing platform. They do appreciate these landing strips and particular light stripes on it, so that lets them know which way to land, so they don't run into things, because bees can be just a little clumsy at times. Butterflies, bright. They do smell faint but fresh. Whereas flies, like putrid. Now, odor, butterflies, monarchs do like an occasional rotten banana, though. So who knows? There are other exceptions to the rules, but this is a very nice little chart indicating, based upon what species you want to bring in, bats versus birds versus butterflies, flies, butterflies, color, nectar guides, odor, nectar, pollen. So you can select your plants based upon what you want to bring in. So the gal that was asking about what she should plant, I'm going to go through 10 plants, but she can look at the description of the plant and look at what she wants to bring in. So if she doesn't want flies, then if she wants butterflies, then she can pick that based upon this list. Okay. Some interesting things. Another fun fact, that wasps do get deceived. So this particular copperbeard orchid has a floral structure and a scent that mimics the female scoliid wasp. So the male wasp looks at it, smells it, and tries to mate with it. And in doing so, picks up pollen and transfers it as it tries to mate with yet another orchid. And so anyway, it's just a kind of comical and just interesting what flowers will do in terms of adaptation, so that it does perform or achieve its final goal, an ultimate goal of reproduction. Other plant morphological adaptation, visual cues, scent, food, mimicry, entrapment. So entrapment's an interesting concept. Here's examples, some very nice visual cues, showy, so lilies, nectar guides, so all of these under ultraviolet light. So this little tongue down here, you would notice it other than under ultraviolet light, this probably shows up much more brightly. And so these are pistils and pseudo petals. And so they are not relative to where the pistil is, but this one here has this landing strip, so it wouldn't land here and go down because there's nothing there for it. But if it lands, sees this ultraviolet light, lands here and walks this way, it's rewarded immediately with access to the pistil and the accompanying nectar. So shapes can be designed for the hummingbird to sample the nectar. So contacted the excerted. So I don't know if that's a typo. I don't know what that word means. So sorry about that. Visual cues. So we talked about this before, is that the large diameter of the plant, for this is like a helps with all kinds of pollinators, especially beetles, that the flower sticks above the water so the beetle can see it, flies towards it, has a really nice place to land. But unfortunately, with these water lilies, or with water lilies, which is a little bit different plant, but the beetle will go inside, taking some pollen that it's gotten from other plants, and will go inside and it will slip down and drown, and the plant will pick up the pollen and also the protein from the plant, from the pollinator as it dissolves it. So like a pitcher plant or a Venus flytrap, they can entrap and keep a hold of. But this is again, visual cues, and you can see how easily visible and easy it is to land on this particular plant. Color, and again, ultraviolet light with one of them particularly lit up so that they would probably land on this petal and be immediately rewarded with access to a pistil. Scent. We know that birds do not have senses of smell, but are highly sensitive to color. But most flowers have a combination of both. So a pollinator follows a flower's scent, so detects it, follows it, the concentration gradient of the chemical producing the scent to the flower. So maybe not as sensitive as a salmon is to molecules in the water, but certainly interesting that they are sensitive enough that they can smell it from, a house or two away and follow the scent to the flower. Plant scent levels tend to be highest when the flowers are ready for pollination. So we do know that for example, in almonds, that there's the best time is about 2 weeks. So they probably can be pollinated a week before and a week after. So maybe a month. But that's not really a large window when you have to transport 600,000 hives from wherever they are in the United States to California, Southern California, well, Central California, and for that pollination period. But that's about 2 weeks maybe that flowers are at their peak. So you can't pollute, so air pollution, greenhouse gases can decrease the concentration of volatile oils, scent, and the distance at which the scent can be detected by pollinators. So it sounds like somebody did that research on that. So pollution is bad for pollinators to find flowers based upon scent. Nectar, we talked about this earlier, is primarily carbohydrates, but also contains amino acids, minerals, vitamins that attract a biotic, which again, we know it means animals versus wind and water, sources of pollination. Plants depending upon pollinators, such as hummingbirds, produce copious amounts of nectar and have a higher concentration of sugar and other nutrients. And that's based upon a adaptation based upon the high metabolic rate of the hummingbird requires that if it's going to feed, it wants to be fed a copious amount. So if you see them once in a while, take a look at a flower and jet away, it says, well, there's nectar here, but not really enough to not enough to justify the hovering, the energy required to hover and collect it. So this, by the way, this honey might be from different sources, the nectar from different sources, or it also might be in different states of dehydration. So as you get, if it's put in when it's nice and fresh and full, and then as it dehydrates, then potentially these ones that are darker and look more solidified are ready for capping and are turned from nectar into, well, honey. And these guys are, these gals, because they're female, probably workers, probably could be fanning to get the evaporation process moving along, just as a comment. So here's pictures of pollen. Remember we talked about that they look kind of like a pharmaceutical ad, you know, for viruses. Anyway, they're high in protein, as we talked about, and many bees and beetles eat it. Some people eat bee pollen and take it in capsules, depending upon their dietary interests and needs. And flowers, depending upon insects that eat pollen, produce large quantities of pollen to ensure successful pollination. And I hadn't known this, but there are apparently two types of main types of pollen. A normal pollen that is used for breeding purposes, and a sterile pollen is more appealing for the pollinating insect to eat. So how they get the pollen for people that eat it from honeybees is that as the bees re-enter a hive, they usually enter through a lower entrance. And what they'll do is they'll have a little basket, and on just above that is this little tripwire. So as the bees are going in, the pollen that they've been collecting in these little pollen sacs on the back legs look like little egg-shaped, roundish or egg-shaped concentrations of pollen. That's how they, when they fly, they pack it there, these hairs and divots on their back legs. And as they go home and re-enter the hive to feed the hive, the tripwire knocks the little piece of pollen off into the basket, and then the beekeeper will come by whenever and pick it up and put it into capsules and sell it as bee pollen. So anyway, well, there you go. Protective chemistry. Some plants provide chemicals that allow the insect pollinator to repel predators. So monarchs feed on milkweeds, and that sap has a chemical in it that they incorporate in the bodies that make them not taste as good, or could actually be poisonous to them. But this chemical defense protects them from a number of predator species, primarily birds. And then you get, of course, other butterflies that do the mimicry that look like a monarch. So even though they aren't feeding on the same milkweeds and don't have that same chemical protection, they look like a monarch and therefore get a protection through the mimicry, of course. And here's another fun fact: bats as pollinators. So you can see, and did you know that bats have, well, this bat does, these long tongues like that. And this is a really nice picture of a cut flower, probably glass, and the bat helping himself or herself. Without bats, say goodbye to bananas, avocados, mangoes, 300 species of fruit, depending on bats for pollination. Figs, cocoa, nuts. So say goodbye to chocolate, which is, by the way, there's some reason chocolate is going up. So if you are a chocolate fan, you should be buying in bulk now, because the price of chocolate they think is going to go up by a third to half, maybe even higher in the next 6 months. And without bats, we wouldn't have plants like agave or tequila, which would be bad, or the iconic saguaro cactus. So all of those require require bats, and giving special photo credit to Merlin Tuttle for some wonderful pictures there. Okay, so mimicry. Many flowers are dark red or red purple, produce a scent that is similar to the scent of rotting flesh. Nice, huh? In this case, pollinator visits a flower, believing there's a meal or carcass on which to lay its eggs. So, blowflies, and there are certain plants that are huge plants that bloom once a year and are famous for their bad smells, but again would attract tons of flies. And orchids frequently have yellow blotchy patterns that mimic the anthers and pollen of other plants visited by the nectar lovers. Entrapment, so we talked about the water lilies, so that entrap and drown insects that land on the petals and are fertilized by any of the pollen on the insect's body. So obviously not all of them are trapped, otherwise they wouldn't get the pollen. But it's just interesting that entrapment is not just in the biotic world. Another fun fact is some adult moths don't feed at all. So this is a Luna moth, which is a type of wild silk moth. So it has no mouth, has no digestive system, only lives for a few hours to breed, to mate, and to lay eggs, and then it dies. So beautiful, and only one purpose, and live for a couple days, and not even enough time to eat as an adult. Okay, so here we go. So here's somebody asked, what should I plant? And they also, someone asked about certain characteristics of different bees. So we're going to cover 10 bees and 10 plants, and this is to the UC Davis Arboretum and Public Garden. So the since native bees differ in the time that they emerge, bee gardens should contain plants with attractive flowers at different times of the year. So with the right bee plants, one small urban garden can attract 40 to 50 species of native bees. So this fits with that question. I have a backyard garden, and what should I plant? Plant as many of these 10 as possible. If you don't want bees, then you could pick, go back to that chart and look. If you want more butterflies, you can plant more butterfly plants that are attractive butterfly based upon their characteristics. This is mostly Bay Area and Sacramento Valley. If you are not sure about the specific area, then you can go, my recommendation is go to the Western, Sunset Western book and garden book, and they have would define climate zones, and you can take a look at the Bay Area and Sacramento Valley area and see what zone that is, and see if you say live in Laguna Beach, and see if they're similar. If they are similar climate zones, then you would have a really easy match to make. But the nice thing about the sunset climate zones versus the federal one, The federal one is based upon heat only. And I'm sorry, is based upon freezing only and not heat, whereas the sunset is sensitive to heat and cold. And also, which is important, given the fact that there are a lot of variations. We're near the coast, so 80% of our weather is governed by the ocean, but we have such varied topographies that the sunset climate zones take all these into account and are much more specific. Okay, in the USDA zones. Okay, so we have a herbaceous perennial. Let's see if I can move this out of my way here. The aster. It's a butterfly magnet. Also attracts many kinds of native bees. Just remember, you might have to do a little bit of deadheading, but it's really nice to have a lavender blue daisy, and it's a beautiful flower. You can look this up on the UC Davis Arboretum and Public Garden site. Also, this gives you enough information as well to go to a nursery and purchase. So one bee that would be commonly in this area would be the mason bee or osmia. So they tend to have kind of roundy bottoms and rounded heads and are kind of small. And they do collect the pollen on the bottom part of their abdomen here versus on the back legs. They can be metallic green to blue, and are commonly the native bee houses that you'll see have attract mason bees because they typically exist in pre-existing cavities in wood or crevices in rock. So this is could be bamboo or any other kind of reed that has a hollow center. 3, 4, 5 millimeter diameter openings are probably will do the best to give you a variety of sizes, will give you a variety of potential habitats. So this could be, say, 5 across here, and this one would be 3, and you can see the 3 is occupied, but the one that looks probably a little bigger is occupied as well. So they'll go in, they'll take in some nectar in a nectar stomach and maybe some of this pollen, and they will leave some of it in here all the way in the back, and then they would lay an egg, and they would bring in mud. You can see the mud here, and seal off a compartment, and then they would back off a half an inch and do the same thing. So they have maybe 8 or 9 of these compartments all the way. So behind this seal is a compartment with an egg and supplies, and then another one sealed off behind that. So 8 or 9 that way. So how they get out is that the last one laid is the first one hatched. So the larvae that's in this last one that's laid hatches and eats its way out, or digs its way out and is free. And then the next one behind it then hatches, and that escapes through its hole that it makes in its cap, and then escapes through the cap that the guy ahead of him does. So last laid, first hatched, and that's the story behind why you'll see these native bee houses with these bamboo things are for native bees. And again, they produce just enough, collect just enough nectar. They really don't produce honey, but nectar for the young, for themselves and for the young, and don't create large amounts of honey to store because they are more individualistic. In general, it's better to have a smaller hive, maybe 20 or 30, 40, 50, instead of these twos versus thousands, because if you put a giant one in, odds are you just create a better scenario for disease. Ceanothus, this is a beautiful plant, masses of blue flowers, good for native bumblebees and other creatures. Tolerates summer irrigation, is relatively long-lived. So this is a good one. Ray Hartman is a upright shrub. So if you can create a standard tree shape, or if you in the sun, it may be really good to keep the leaves down and not trim it up like a normal tree shape, like a lollipop, because the bark can be sensitive to sun. If it is sensitive to sun, you can go to Home Depot and buy and don't use paint, because paint can be toxic. And if it's not toxic to the paint, it can be toxic when it drips down into the soil. But you can buy something called IV Organics through Home Depot, and it is a organic milk base covering that you paint onto the bark so you don't get sunburn. Very helpful for citrus, which is very thin skinned and does get sunburned. And once it's sunburned, it often the tree dies. So just keep that in mind. So if you're going to trim it into large shrubs that normally are shrubs, you can trim it into a tree, then protect the bark with painting. Here's a yellow-faced bumblebee. So this is pretty common. You see the white face, bright colored, moistened pollen pellets, often carrying that. That's a female doing that. Hardworking, and this is one that does the buzz pollination. And when you see them, you wonder how they can fly, because it just doesn't seem like there's enough wing. But they are hardworking and hard flying. Yellow-faced bumblebee. Western redbud. So this may be the one that does have some different nectar characteristics. I'm not an expert on that by any means. Native to California's Valley floor, but Western redbud is a beautiful, beautiful large shrub or tree, and I would encourage you to look this up as one of the stable anchors of any decorative garden, and it's great for pollinators. And if you see cuts out of the leaves, then you know that you have a native leaf cutter, because remember we saw back here that these are covered with mud, but also leaf cutters will use the same methodology of nesting inside a tube, but instead of mud, they'll use leaves to create either part of the tube or just seal off the tube itself. Oh, there's a leaf cutter right there. So triangular heart-shaped abdomens, thick heads that hold thick heads. Nice talk. Thick heads that hold muscles required for leaf cutting, that partition their nest between eggs. Most will nest in holes. And again, yeah, use the leaf to partition. So if you see a kind of a sort of a hole in your leaf that sort of scalloped edges, that's probably just a large insect. The leaf cutter would take usually kind of more of a swoop, little cleaner cut, just like you see here, versus bites like that, which means like a big grasshopper's been on it. California poppy. can perennialize itself by sprouting from the roots. These are sweat bees in here. We'll talk about them in a second. Covering themselves, rolling around. It's kind of fun to watch as they do that. I wonder if there's some narcotic component in there that makes them frolic a little bit while they're in there. So there's an ultra green sweat bee. So pretty small, striped abdomen, easy to identify because of the color and the striped abdomen. Common jewel-like appearance, usually green. Blanket flower, another beautiful flower. I love the variegation of the central component and also the petals themselves. And there's these green nascent flower buds, all lead to a very nice look. Daisy type flower. In the valley, they attract longhorn bees like melissodes, and collect nectar and pollen from the showy orange and yellow flowers. Watch out for heavy soil. So in Orange County, if you have heavy soils, instead of trying to amend it, it's probably better to just create a raised planter and just change instead of carting in cubic yards of amendment, better to just you bring in 20 bags of raised planter mix and be done with it. And plus it's sterile when it starts out, and you'll never be able to amend your soil if you have heavy clay soil in Orange County to the level that a flower like this would appreciate. So there's your longhorn melissode and longhorn bee. So you see the horn here. It's a great picture. Hairy legs, branched hairs for carrying pollen. So each one of these hairs on the female have scopy, branched hairs for carrying pollen. So males only have their long antennae. The females do not have long ones. Lavender, there's all different types of lavender. They tend to be a good 3 to 4 year plant. Then you need to cut them back. They do not do well next to lawns because they just, if you want to kill it, just give it too much moisture and the roots will rot. So it does need to be dried. So not near daily watering, for example, near a lawn. Okay. Well, otherwise, very popular with all types of pollinators. Here's the carpenter bee. So this is one that we talked about, nectar robbing at the base of flowers. And neither one stings. And this one looks like that big old teddy bear that I was talking about. So you can add, and I've never tried this, and if you had, let me know. But you supposedly you can pick them up and they're strong, but can't sting. But look at beautiful eyes. The female is dark. And let's see, females are large, stout, and shiny black bee, and one of the most noticeable found in Valley Garden. So you probably will notice the black one first because it is a bit intimidating.
Just a heads up, we're pretty close to the
Yes.
ball.
Okay, and then catmint, another herbaceous perennial plant, loved by all kinds of leafcutters, digger bees, orchard bees, love the nectar. Okay, so all of these are in there. I think this might be our last bee here. Let's see. Digger bee. So you can notice that digger bees have beautiful green eyes, opalescent green eyes, and because they dig, have these nice little thorns or horns on their or spines on the rear legs for digging. Another salvia or sage plant. The male Carter bees may be noticeable around these. So that's another great plant. And this is the wool Carter bee, non-native European introduction. It's noticeable by the interrupted yellow stripe on its back. Goldenrod, California Creek, another. Just make sure you deadhead to get reblooming. Okay, sweat bees, and they cover themselves with hair so they don't carry it just in the back. That's why you can see in general the hairiness extends over the whole body. And I think this is the last one, it's Russian sage. So again, a very nice purple flower cut back in the winter. Mining bees. So make sure you leave some uncovered, not soil, so that they have a place to emerge from the soil nest. So again, they may go through very, very shallow mulch, but in general, they will go down a couple of inches to find the soil. Okay, and then we talked about this earlier, is that plants for native bees only, not that common, would have to have a narrow petal access to nectar. Tiny flowers, good only for small native bees. Sweat bees, very small carpenter bees, maybe orchard bees, are the only ones that could feed on some of these plants. Popcorn flowers, I was thinking about still flowers, but these popcorn flowers, if you've been to Yosemite, for example, and you are going up in the hills up on I forget what highway it is, 152 or something, you'll see these broad casts of white flowers, and that's the popcorn flower. But you can see how small the opening is here, and only small native bees can do that. So that hopefully helps add to the depth of the question. Are the specialist bees? Organizations that help pollinators, pollinator partnership, I talked about. USDA is always a good resource for pictures. And if you're going to plan your wildflower visit to the desert, they can help you with the timing. There's Pollinators, Civilian Science Organization, Xerces, iNaturalist, Monarch, Milkweed Mapper, Audubon, Project Noah. So all of these you can get involved in. I do have direct experience with iNaturalist, and it's been very helpful to myself and to scientists that want to use civilians as scientists. And then here's that last fun fact, is that a hawk moth prepares to get a fix from the sacred Datura's narcotic nectar, and will spend quite a bit of time there just because it just gets a little, well, it has a narcotic nectar. So this is a nice print or image by Paul Murcha. And we will now know the depths to which plants will develop methodologies to attract and keep pollinators near them, so that they ensures a good pollination and reproduction of its species. And that is pretty much the end. So not bad timing. There is a resources based upon this. So, and again, thank you for your generosity of time and interest in pollinators. So any final questions?
I have a comment, if anybody can hear me.
We can hear you.
Okay. Have you ever heard of Lacey Facilia?
No, I haven't.
I would strongly recommend. It's a pollinator-friendly plant. Bumblebees, honeybees. It's a legume. It's also called a scorpion plant, and in Germany they call it beekeeper's friend.
Oh,
It's a purple flower. It's beautiful.
Keon, have you heard of that?
I don't think so. Can you say it again?
Lacey
Scorpion plant.
Facilia, Lacy PHACELIA.
Thanks.
It's an
Good
awesome
friend.
plant.
And why is it helpful?
It's a legume, but it's also an excellent bumblebee and a honeybee attractant.
Oh, I
If you
see.
want to see, if you want to see a ton of bees all over it, it's an excellent plant. It's a pretty plant too. It's got like the flower's got like a scorpion tail shape to it. It's really pretty.
Okay. Well, thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you.
Can
And
you
then, are you
just,
familiar with sandfoin?
No, I'm not.
That was developed at the Montana State. It's a dryland crop, purple, and I've had excellent results with that in with honeybees as far as nectar flow and pollen.
Mm-hmm. Is it easy to
It's-
grow? Where are you located?
I'm in Bozeman, Montana, so if it grows here, I'm
I
guessing it'll probably grow down there.
I see.
It's a zone 3 technically, but it's I've had excellent results with it. What's neat about it is it's a non-bloater plant, so horses can get into it and they won't bloat. It's got
Oh,
it's got natural tannins like a digel type product, and they won't bloat on it. And what's crazy about it is as the plant grows, it's kind of like an indeterminate. It produces just as much nectar and pollen as when it first sprouted till the end of the year.
oh,
nice.
can
It
you
wasn't.
spell the name of that first plant you recommended again?
It's Lacey Facilia.
I'll put it in the chat.
LACY,
Thank you.
PHACELIA. And I buy my seed from Territorial Seeds, and I just sow it annually, and it works great.
That's awesome.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you
And
very
the
much.
second one you mentioned, was sand coin?
No, sandfoin. It's spelled still. It's different. It's SAINFOIN.
Okay, thank you very much.
And I know the gentleman that raises it over about an hour west of here, and that's also an excellent wildlife attractant. He can't keep the elk out of his pastures when he's got that in there.
Yeah, a lot of great options out there. Before we go to the other questions, I'll do a quick
End of
closing.
story. Thank you.
No, thank
Thank
you.
you.
Yeah. So we will send the recap out in the next few days, and I'll include the names of these plants that were mentioned as well, in addition to all the other questions and answers. Also the slides, very useful in this case, because I'm guessing most people would want to go back and look at the details for each of the plants compared to what pollinators they want, and that would be useful in the last few slides there. And thank you, Art, for another strong start to this series. And I'm just very thankful that this has become a very concrete part of the curriculum. Last year, I was thinking, oh, if this is the only year we provided, that would be such a tragedy. But thank you for coming back and continuing this and memorializing it, so this will always be something that CAMBP offers.
Well, it's such a topical issue that I'm only touching upon it, and I'm interested in adding to the diversity of California Master Beekeeper programs, presentations, and the coverage. And I'd like to do more on native bees as well, because it's such a huge untapped area, and I know that commercially they're looking into tapping into the native bee components as well. And so thank you, everybody. The next program in June is my favorite one, and again, it has to do with the nuts and bolts of more gardening. So if you have friends that want to get into supporting pollinators but are not strong gardeners, then the next class would be will have certain things that you may not have considered and will be very helpful.
That's a great one. That's June 8th, and that's creating gardens and homes for pollinators. You can register for it right now if you're interested. And also other classes, next couple months are completely packed. So let's see, we have installing a honeybee package next week. And then we also have a guest lecture from PhD Elena Nino. She's the director of the lab and the director of camp. She's going to be talking about honeybee nutrition and what she's learned in her research recently on that. And there's even more classes. I won't go through all of them, but a lot of options out there. And the link will be in the recap as well for the class schedule, or you can just go on the camp website and click on class schedule. And with that, let's go to the questions. So you mentioned, so yeah, what book are these resources and photos and info coming from? You mentioned that a Sunset, New Western Garden book. That was one of
Yes.
them. Any others that you would suggest for
Well,
class?
let me see if let me look in the sites here. I don't think I have any of the books here. I would go to the Pollinator Partnership website and look at their bookshelf there, because it's depending upon what you would like, whether you focus more on plants or whether you focus more on pollinators. They have a pretty good bookshelf. I have that would be my first or my second book I would source I would go to if I were going to develop a garden. And also I would go to the where could they find those and I referred to it, I'm going to get to it in a second. There it is there. So UC Davis Arboretum and Public Garden.
Mhm.
And I think if you type that in, you will get pretty much those 10 plants. But it's in the slides as well.
Yeah, I'll put that website in the chat too in the recap. Perfect, thank you. So the New Western Garden book, they have a new one. Should they get the new one? That's what I said.
Well, it seems like they come out with a new version about every 3 to 5 years.
Okay.
So I don't know what version they're on, but it's good for beginners and experts.
Perfect. And then the pollinator partnership and then UC Davis Arboretum. Thank you.
Yes.
And next question. So someone has a bee hotel, but it has not attracted that many bees. So do you have any suggestions for attracting more? There's some blooming plants on their patio, but they're still not seeing much.
Two things. Make sure it's in a sunny area. Make sure it's so one is better in sun. Two, it's better if there is some mud or bare soil around it. And three is you have to be patient because it takes time for them to find it. So the average time it takes for them to find it is 2 years. So if it hasn't been there a couple of years, then they still may find it.
That's really interesting. It takes that long. And also, I'll mention that there's some research being done at UC Riverside out of the Cyber Lab. And I'll put it's an acronym, the Cyber Lab, about the native beehives and how effective they are and what they attract and stuff like that. So I don't know where they are on that, but I know a year and a half ago they started that. So you might want to check that out.
Yeah, they did you go to that? They had a conference last year on bee health.
Yes, they do it every year. I went to the one, not this last year, but I went to the one in 2022. And that was where they talked about that research that I just referenced.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, the reference to the popcorn flower, that I talked to a researcher, one of the keynote speakers, about what kind of plants we could plant that native bee or exclusive to native bees. And he said, well, I have some bad news for you. It just doesn't, other than maybe a popcorn plant, there's nothing that is exclusive to the native bees. which is too bad.
Yeah.
I would like to be able to support them. More specifically, but the generalists have access to everything the native bees do, again, except for very small flowers that even as a small, just the small native bees like masons and things like that, with a very small proboscis can get into. So anyway, that was a good conference though. I thank you for
You liked
mentioning
it?
it.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember when I went, the food was, they had this one night, it was like the night they had the dinner, and they brought in the caterers from the university, and there was fried chicken, and it's my type of food. It was good. Yeah. That's all the questions in the chat. Does anybody else have any questions verbally or comments they'd like to share?
I have a quick question. I felt like there was one thing you kept referencing. It was I believe it was number 42. Can I see your do you have the references? You
I
see,
think I just have USDA on it.
okay, good. All right, I'll look them up. Thank you very much. Great class.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, everyone. And thank you for your interest in supporting pollinators in general, just not only honeybees, right? Yeah, sometimes we
Yes.
can get a little bit very focused on it, but it's all good. Yeah, it's good to have a holistic view. Have a great weekend, and thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Catherine, did you have a question?
No, I wanted to talk with Kian. So
Oh,
I
okay.
just wanted to say, I just wanted to finish one thread that we were talking about during the break.
Yeah,
So
let's do it.
anyway,
Yeah.
I saw this package of a little jar with a plastic lid, and next to it was a pack of dried apple bits and sugar and oatmeal. And you put the oatmeal in the jar and you covered it with milk and screwed it on, shook it, and then put it in the refrigerator, and it
Oh,
supposedly
interesting.
would soften overnight. It didn't soften appropriately for me, and I've done that with a thermos. You know, when we used to do a lot of sailing, we'd make oatmeal in the evening, and when you came on watch, your thermos would be full of nice cooked oatmeal because we just poured hot water on it. But I was thinking eventually down the line, travel mugs with a little packet. You know what I'm talking about. Put the water in, shake it. Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you. The
No,
talk
thank
was
you,
wonderful.
Kathy.
Thank you. So bye-bye.